Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Domestic Violence Capacity Building Program webinar on assisting LGBTI clients. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are holding this webinar today. In Brisbane, they are the Turrbal and Yagara people. I wish to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. We would also like to acknowledge the strength and resilience of brother boys, sister girls, and gender diverse Indigenous people. As this webinar is being viewed by people across Queensland and Australia, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and extend a warm welcome to any First Australians listening today. This webinar is provided with funding by Queensland State Government's Victim Services Funding Program, Building Capacity 2018-19. The presentation and webinar is for professional development and education purposes for Community Legal Centres staff and is not intended to provide legal advice. It is not to be used for commercial purposes without the express permission of the author. Information is current as at May 7th, 2019. We'd also like to ensure that you feel safe while accessing these training materials, as some content may be disturbing or upsetting. If you feel triggered, we encourage you to use your discretion as to whether you should continue listening. You can access additional information, resources, or professional support or advice from Community Legal Centres Queensland's Keep Safe website page. Today, we are fortunate to have as our presenters Kai Priestly, Evening Clinic Coordinator at the LGBTI Legal Service, and Renea Hart, Principal Solicitor. I'll now hand over to Kai and talk to you again at the end of the session.
Good afternoon. So today's webinar, we will discuss the challenges and strategies when working with LGBTIQ people who experience domestic and family violence. We'll focus on common misconceptions and challenges faced by the community, as well as LGBTIQ people's experience of domestic and family violence. To begin with, the LGBTIQ acronym is used to refer to people who are from sexually or gender diverse communities. They may identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, or queer. Some people may use other terms as well. There is a great deal of diversity within these communities, and a wide range of terms and languages are used to describe biological sex, gender, sexuality, and sexual practice. So for today's webinar, we'll be covering the following topics on the slide. We understand that webinar 1 discussed the family domestic violence legislation in depth. So today we won't be redelivering that information, but rather we're going to focus on service delivery to LGBTI people and assist you in effective service delivery by explaining a lot of the background and context of, I guess, the unique issues that face LGBTIQ clients. So to start off with some background information, most LGBTIQ relationships are like heterosexual relationships and are based on love and respect. Some can be based on abuse and control, unfortunately. And that's why LGBTIQ people also experience intimate partner violence at similar rates as those who identify as heterosexual. Unfortunately, there's been an invisibility of LGBTIQ relationships in policy and practice response. There's been a lack of acknowledgement that intimate partner violence also exists in these communities. Beliefs that privilege heterosexual relationships can also affect victims' experiences. Homophobia, transphobia, and heterosexism affect the experience of responses to intimate partner violence. Service providers also lack awareness and understanding of the LGBTIQ population and their experience of intimate partner violence. So looking at LGBTIQ people's experience of domestic and family violence, they can experience it slightly differently. So there's likely to be a higher proportion of men and women as perpetrators. Heterosexual stereotypes about men and women can also result in false assumptions. For example, a lesbian woman is capable of physical violence, or that gay men are masculine. There's also the unique issue where lesbian abusers can actually seek to access women's shelters or support groups that have already been owned by their partner in order to continue perpetrating violence. Young LGBTIQ people can also be subject to their parents, siblings, and other family members. We're also seeing that there is a lack of services for male victims. So while all forms of violence can be experienced, some unique differences in perpetrators' behaviours include threatening to out or actually outing the victim in terms of their sexuality or HIV status, withholding hormone treatments, and preventing participation in LGBTIQ events, name-calling, ridicule, and public humiliation. Intimate partner violence within LGBTIQ relationships wasn't actually acknowledged until relatively recently. Intimate partner violence within relationships has been absent from government policy and service practice responses to intimate violence in LGBTIQ relationships. This has been a result of a heterosexual framework where women are often featured as the victim and men as the perpetrator. So this lack of acknowledgement has resulted in, a gap in the existing frameworks. So at the moment, there is little population-wide data available, largely due to the lack of acknowledgement and underreporting of intimate partner violence in general. According to the Australian Research Centre for Health and Sexuality, they conducted a survey of LGBTIQ people and found that 41% of male identifying respondents and 28% of female identifying respondents had experienced physical violence within a same-sex intimate relationship. 25% of respondents had experienced sexual assault within same-sex intimate relationship, with women identifying and trans respondents more likely to experience sexual assault. Looking at children and young people in particular, it's very important to note that LGBTIQ people may experience abuse and violence across their lifespan as a result of their gender or sexual identity, including from within their own families. So a national survey of LGBTIQ young people aged 14 to 21 years found that significant rates of young people had experienced abuse. So 61% had experienced verbal abuse due to their gender identity or sexuality. 18% reported physical abuse as a result of their gender identity or sexuality. 80% reported abuse occurred at school. And 24% reported that they had experienced verbal and physical abuse in the family home. So looking at the implications for service providers, while some patterns of intimate partner violence in LGBTIQ relationships are similar to those in heterosexual relationships, others are slightly different. So intimate family violence in these relationships often occurs within a structural environment of heterosexism and heteronormativity, and homo, bi, transphobia affect LGBTIQ people across their lifespan. Research suggests that abusive partners within LGBTIQ relationships may use this negative environment to exercise power and control. For example, perpetrators may use their partner's sexuality or identity as a form of control by limiting their access to friends, social networks. They can also threaten to tell their partner's employer, parent, children, landlord, or friends out their same-sex or trans identity. Heteronormative notions of intimate partner violence may also prevent victims from understanding their experience, as it is predominantly viewed as a phenomenon that affects women at the hands of a man. So there are many things that you should be mindful of when assisting LGBTIQ clients who are experiencing intimate partner violence to understand the barriers they face. There is often an inability by support services and practitioners to view intimate partner violence outside of heterosexual frameworks. There is the assumption that intimate partner violence is mutual in LGBTIQ relationships. There is an insensitivity to and or lack of awareness of the specific needs/issues of the LGBTIQ population. And there is discrimination or fear of discrimination, particularly from police and the criminal justice system. For example, a trans client who has not formally changed their name, but is known by and goes by another name, the courts will use and refer to them by their dead name, which can cause further distress and trauma. There is also the issue of stigma. This prevents people from seeking help, particularly for people who identify as bisexual and trans. Individuals may not reach out for help because they are not open with their sexual orientation or gender identity, especially if their family or friends are unaware about their LGBTIQ status. Trans people may fear being outed before they are ready to disclose their identity and/or before they have made associated changes such as using preferred pronouns, a preferred name, changing physical appearance, or undergoing any surgical procedure or hormonal therapies. Conversely, if trans people who have been publicly passing as a particular gender, they may fear seeking help because this would expose their trans history. There is also a history of poor relationships between police and the LGBTIQ communities that has resulted in a fear of police. There is a desire by victims not to draw negative attention to the LGBTI community, and victims are often fearful of being alienated within the LGBTIQ communities. There is also a belief that their experience will not be taken seriously by the police. It'll just be treated as boys being boys, or I think the term we've heard before is just a cat fight, when it's actually a lot more serious. And most significantly, there's a belief that they will be discriminated against by the police. We just want to acknowledge that the QPS has taken steps to address some of these barriers, and one of the most significant of these being the LGBTI liaison officers. We've worked with them a couple of times, and they can actually step in. The victim can actually ask for the LGBTI liaison officer to be there, and they help to remove some of these barriers. So some important practical points to remember when assisting LGBTIQ people is to be aware and respectful of preferred pronouns and gender identity. If you are unsure, it's easy to just ask, what pronoun do you prefer, or what would you like me to refer you as? Asking questions and being respectful is the most important thing. But it is also important not to ask irrelevant or unnecessary questions if someone does not wish to disclose this. If a trans client is before the court, contact the court to make arrangements for their preferred name to be used so they are not referred to by their dead name, which will cause additional distress and trauma. Please be aware of the barriers faced by LGBTIQ people when seeking support and assistance. Because of the barriers they have faced in their life, a lot of people may not be willing to or uncomfortable sharing information at first. But this is because members of the LGBTI community have often faced significant discrimination and difficulty while trying to live their lives and access a service. So it's really important to take into consideration and be aware of the background of LGBTI clients. And finally, to gain a better understanding of the unique issues that face LGBTIQ domestic and family violence victims. So we have a case study. I'll just skip the case study, and do that to the end. Just have a couple more points. So as we touched on, always be respectful. Do not ask unnecessary, irrelevant questions. And by that we mean don't ask questions for your own interest. Intimate partner violence in LGBTIQ relationships is under-acknowledged and misunderstood in policy, practice, and judicial responses until relatively recently. And this may mean that some people don't actually realize they are in an abusive relationship. This is because they think domestic violence is violence against a woman perpetrated by a man. The available evidence suggests intimate partner violence occurs in LGBTIQ relationships similar to heterosexual relationships, and the abuse similarly involves the use of power, coercion, and control. In addition, often people use outing as a form of violence. Heterosexism, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia are central to understanding how LGBTIQ people experience violence and how this acts as a barrier to accessing services and responses from service providers and the justice system. So to jump back to the case study, I'll just read this out loud. So Matt is a trans male, female to male, who is in a relationship with Sally. Matt and Sally's relationship has broken down and is not amicable. Sally is becoming increasingly verbally abusive towards Matt and is threatening to out his trans status to his friends and co-workers who are unaware of this. Matt seeks your advice, but is concerned that if he files a domestic violence order application against Sally, that his trans status will be made public and his family and co-workers will find out. So just think about what you would do in this scenario if you're approached with this problem. and think about ways to assist Matt while still protecting his privacy. Does anyone have any?
If you have any comments in relation to the case study, feel free to type them into the question box.
Okay, yep. So I've got that one.
Yep. One of the suggestions is that advise that the DV court is closed, and that is a good suggestion. But sometimes, in our experience, we've found that that's not always enough to assist the client with their anxieties with respect to particularly being outed if they're not ready to come out yet. So I think the key in that respect is the support that you put around your client, particularly with respect to the support services and those social supports that are around the client, and just be ready and be guided by the client with respect to when they're ready to proceed, and so that they know their options, provide them with the advice, and also link them in with support services. And then once they're ready with those support services, then they may well be ready to proceed with the legal process.
Okay. Yep, so it is a double-edged sword, yes. So just to finish up then, we have a couple of stats that weren't actually included in the presentation, but I think would be extremely useful. So 33.6% of LGBTI people hide their gender identity and sexuality when accessing support services. In a 2011 survey that looked at New South Wales domestic violence and support services, of the existing service providers, 18% rated themselves as fully competent to work with gay or lesbian people. 7.8% rated themselves as fully competent to work with transgender clients, and 5% rated themselves fully competent to work with intersex clients. At the end of the day, I think it's very important to remain respectful and to be mindful that, I guess, things that may be common sense to a lot of people don't necessarily apply, to be mindful of people's preferences and to understand the backgrounds that people are coming from. So if anyone has any further questions.
Yeah, we'll just give you guys a few minutes to type, if you have any questions, to type them into the question box. While we're waiting, I'd just like to give a big thank you to Kai and Renea for the presentation. If anyone has any questions, just type them in. All right, well, it looks like the presentation answered all of your questions, so that's great. Thank you for attending, and thank you again to our presenters.